Chinese nationals over foreigners. And so the transplant tourism, which used to overwhelm the transplant business in China, hasn't completely gone, but it's diminished substantially. I mean, the people going as transplant tourists into China now, a lot fewer numbers, mostly ethnic Chinese, pretending to be Chinese nationals, and it's more of an underground thing than an above-board thing. The Chinese government has set up a system of registration for hospitals. I mean, technically it was on the statute books before, but they reenacted it and actually enforced it this time around. And when we started off, there was about 2,000 hospitals doing transplants in China, and now it's down to about 700, the registered ones. Within the civilian system, though, the military system still carries on unimpeded by this. They have enacted a law saying you actually have to consent for the donation of organs. It's not a law, as far as I can tell, that's being enforced, but at least the law is there. They have prohibited the sale of organs. Now, of course, that was never the problem in China. The sources were not selling the organs, the hospitals were selling the organs, and of course, and you still pay to hospitals for organ transplants in China. They have set up an organ donation system, which didn't exist before, a pilot project in 10 cities. It became functional. They announced it in 2009, but it became functional in March 2010. They have promised a law sourcing from the brain-dead cardiac ally, the accident victims. They don't actually have such a law, and they didn't, and they've been promising it for several years now, but at least there is a prospect of that happening. So you can see there's a lot of movement, and there's movement around the world as well, outside of China. The Transplantation Society, which is an official organization of transplant professionals, has developed an ethical statement saying, don't deal with Chinese transplant professionals unless you can be satisfied that they're not sourcing organs from prisoners. Same with the World Medical Association. They developed a policy of don't source organs from prisoners sentenced to death, except for family members. And they got the Chinese Medical Association to sign on to that. Israel, which used to finance through the insurance system people going to China for transplants, has flipped around completely. Now the insurance system says the complete opposite, saying we will not finance transplants unless we're satisfied that they're in conformity with international ethics. In Australia, hospitals are not training transplant professionals from China unless they can be satisfied they're not involved in abusive transplants. And in Queensland, they've actually announced that as a health policy. In Taiwan, they've banned, in Taiwan, there used to be a lot of people going to China for transplants, and they banned the brokerage business because a lot of these transplants were being done through brokers. And so the combination of the outside pressure, and there's activity in other countries as well, the combination of outside pressure and internal change has meant that the market has shifted. And basically in China, what we've now is got Chinese demand, and according, again, to Chinese figures, there's 2 million people in China who need transplants. And China is doing transplants at the rate of about 10,000 a year, which is a high volume, the second highest in the world after the U.S., but it's still, if you've got 2 million people needing transplants, it's an inexhaustible market. Now, despite all these changes, as far as we can tell, the problem has got worse rather than better, because the death penalty has gone down. Again, we can see this. We can see this from statistics from Amnesty International. We can see it also because of a change in Chinese policy. China gets. They've got a wealth of human rights violations. They get criticism from all over for lots of things, and one of the criticisms is the death penalty, to which, to a certain extent, they've reacted. And so they changed the death penalty system from a system where the death penalty can be imposed by the regional courts to a system where the death penalty can be imposed only by the Supreme Court. And this caused a big drop at the time of the shift. And then eventually the numbers are coming up again, but it's still a lot lower than it ever was. Yet what we saw with transplants is there was a bit of a dip, not as big a dip as the death penalty dip, and then transplant volumes go to traditional levels. Now there is a greater variety of sources than there used to be, because they are starting to get more donors because of the encouragement of the donor system. But still, as far as we can tell, this problem of where the organ's coming from is more acute than it ever was. The death penalty source has gone down, and it certainly hasn't been picked up by the donor system, which has just kicked in, which leads to us to believe that the sourcing of organs from prisoners of Falun Gong has increased rather than decreased. Well, this saga has led us to conclude that we should carry on. I mean, when we started off, it was basically just David Kilgore and myself. Annie made the statement, but that was it. We had some people corroborating our work, but they weren't really... Kirk Allison, University of Minnesota, who's one of the people who corroborated our work, has been quite helpful in carrying on with the issue. But since then, there have been other people who picked it up. I mentioned the UN Rapporteur on Torture, Manfred Nowak, and the UN Rapporteur on Religious Intolerance, Asma Jahangir, the UN Committee Against Torture. There's also been a few NGOs that have picked it up. Interfaith International has been helpful, based in Geneva. The International Society for Human Rights, based in Frankfurt. Human Rights Without Frontiers, based in Brussels, have picked up the issue. And there's been some parliamentarians that have been supportive and helpful and interested. There's been a parliamentarian in Canada, Boris Rzuski, who's introduced a private member's bill to make transplant tourism an extraterritorial offense. There's an MP in France, Valérie Boyer, that has introduced legislation about compulsory reporting of transplant tourism by doctors and patients. And there's been some sympathetic people in Australia and New Zealand. I just came from New Zealand and Auckland. I met with Kathy Casey, who's she's a city councillor in Auckland, who's been very supportive, and Keith Locke, who's a member of the Green Party in Auckland, has been supportive, and so on. But the problem is still there, and there's still advocacy work for us to do. In my view, in light of all the movement we've seen in the last few years, without a solution, if we keep on pressing, there will be more movement and eventually, I hope, a solution. Now, there's a number of different ways of solving this problem. One of them is get the Communist Party out of power. Not a simple solution, not an immediate solution, but that's one solution. Another is get the party to change its mind about the Falun Gong. Not so far-fetched. If they can change their mind about socialism, they can change their mind about the Falun Gong. I think they should eventually realize that Falun Gong isn't... the Falun Gong is more trouble to them banned than unbanned. The Falun Gong community is very concerned about the persecution, and as a result generating a lot of protests about the persecution. And I'm sure they'd be concerned about other human rights violations if the persecution stopped. But a lot of this organizational structure, maybe the people who are Falun Gong practitioners here could tell me that, but I suspect if the Falun Gong just got integrated into Chinese society, became accepted, a lot of this structure of Epoch Times and New Tang Dynasty TV and the Shenyang performances and all this, it might well just disappear. Or it would become a commercial venture, something like that. But it wouldn't carry on the way it is now, which is because it's very driven by the persecution. That's another solution. A third solution is just abolish these re-education through labor camps, because they are organ banks. They're also slave labor camps, but they're organ banks, and once they're gone, the organ banks are gone. Fourth solution is stop sourcing organs from prisoners. Now, in the short term, that seems actually quite promising, because the position of the Chinese government is, yes, we will do that. We accept that sourcing organs from prisoners is wrong, and we will stop sourcing organs from prisoners. Just give us time. We are shifting to other sources, donations, accident victims, eventually. So, my attitude is, okay, fine, do it yesterday instead of tomorrow, and at least this is an area where the Chinese government is willing to discuss. I can talk to them about stop the persecution of Falun Gong, and they come back, you're anti-China, it's an evil cult, and make up quotes and whatever. I can go to them and say, stop the sourcing of organs for prisoners, and they say, yeah, you're right, give us time, we'll do it. So it's a lot different discourse. I mean, I don't mind dealing with people who shout insults at me, but because I mean, I'm used to that as a courtroom lawyer. I mean, judges do it to me all the time. But I mean, a lot of people would prefer polite discourse to angry discourse, and so for those people, talking about the sourcing of organs from prisoners is a kind of an easier way to deal with the issue and potentially more fruitful in the short run. So, I mean, obviously, if the government of China stopped killing Falun Gong for their organs, my work would be over on this issue. But it wouldn't be an ideal solution if they stopped killing Falun Gong for their organs and still killed prisoners sentenced to death, if they still had re-education through labor camps, if they still tortured the Falun Gong, if they still denied freedom of speech and so on. I mean, I would like a simple solution to the problem that we've addressed, but I would like some of these broader solutions even more. Anyhow, I think I'll stop there. I think there's one other person who's going to say something. Yeah, and then we can have some questions. Okay, sorry if I went on a bit long, but thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was a very informative talk. There will be a chance to ask David some questions after our next speaker. And our next speaker is Dr. Yuan Hong, a Chinese doctor who practiced medicine in China up until 1997 when he came here. He knows a little bit about organ transplants, but of course not Falun Gong because the persecution didn't start till after 1997. But please welcome Dr. Yuan.
大家好，我叫袁红，是原来中国医科大学第一附属医院心脏外科的一名医生。这个医院在中国东北辽宁省沈阳市。
Good evening. My name is Yuan Hong. I graduated from university in 1987 and worked as a heart surgeon for 10 years at the Medical University Hospital in northeastern China until 1997.
我本人是1987年在中国医科大学毕业，1997年5月份我来到澳大利亚。在我刚到澳洲不久的时候，就在一家中文报上看见，原来的中国天津武警医院的一名医生，在美国呢向美国社会揭露中国用死刑犯器官做脏器移植手术。当时一个中国外交官在公开场合发表声明说这种事情根本是不存在的。那我当时就觉得就非常好笑，因为就我所知道的。中国的脏器移植手术所用的供体器官，基本上都是从死刑犯身上摘取的，因为我们医院就这么做。
Soon after arriving in Australia in May 1997, I read news in a Chinese newspaper that a former doctor from Tianjin Military Hospital, then living in the U.S., disclosed to U.S. media that Chinese regime was using executed prisoners as a source of organ transplants. A Communist Party spokesperson declared that it had never happened in China. I found it rather pathetic. Many hospitals' employees, when I was working in hospital in China, knew that most transplanted organs were taken from people who were sentenced to death. Our hospital was doing just that.
因为在中国根本没有正常的供体脏器的来源。中国几千年来的传统伦理崇尚身体完整，死后入土为安，加上中共统治中国以后呢，尤其是经历了一场文化大革命，中国人的道德下滑得很厉害，人与人之间基本是互相利用，甚至是人人为劲敌的关系。人活着的时候都不想去帮助别人，死后怎么还可能呢？在我上大学的时候，有一个姓刘的同班同学。他的父亲呢患了胃癌， 他父亲叮嘱家人，在他死后呢，把自己的遗体捐献给